The snowstorm had swallowed the small frontier town of Cold Creek in a white, whirling silence. But the silence shattered when the cries of two little girls pierced the winter air. "Let her go!" the twins screamed, their tiny boots slipping in the snow as they ran toward the center of the street. Their mother, Alara Whitlock, a young widow whose life had been torn apart by tragedy, was being dragged by her hair through the icy street by Marshall Granger, a man who had once sworn to protect the town but had slowly allowed cruelty and corruption to rot his soul. People watched from porches and windows, some too afraid to intervene, others pretending not to see. The twins, barely 6 years old, had more courage in them than the entire row of silent onlookers, and their voices trembled with a mix of fear and determination as they stumbled toward their mother. Snowflakes clung like broken stars to Alara's tangled hair and worn clothes, her knees scraping across the frozen ground as she tried to protect her children with her eyes even while she couldn't free herself. Everything about her life had unraveled since her husband had died in the mine explosion months earlier, an explosion she always suspected was no accident. After his death, the Whitlock home had been seized when she couldn't pay the unfair town fees the marshal imposed on widows without protection. Forced into the streets, she survived only by cleaning stables and sewing late into the night. But even then, the marshal never left her alone. He blamed her husband for speaking too loudly against the mine owner who lined Granger's pockets. Today he had decided to make an example of her, accusing her of theft when she refused to give him the last coins she earned honestly. As the children reached her, they threw themselves around her, crying into her torn sleeves, begging the marshal to stop. Their voices echoed through the town square, pure, raw, heartbreaking. "Marshal, enough!" shouted old Mr. Cargill, the barber, stepping forward hesitantly. But Granger only tightened his grip, lifting Alara's face toward him. "This woman thinks the rules don't apply to her," he growled. "And now the whole town will see what happens to troublemakers." Alara's breath came out in puffs of white fog, her lips trembling not from fear but anger. "I did nothing wrong," she whispered hoarsely. "You're doing this because my husband knew the truth." The marshal's eyes flickered with something, fear, guilt, before he jerked her upward again. The twins screamed louder, pulling at his coat, hitting him with tiny fists that barely reached his waist. And suddenly, as if the heavens themselves couldn't take it anymore, a gunshot cracked through the storm. Everyone froze. The world held its breath. The shot hadn't hit anyone, it was fired into the sky from the porch of the old saloon, where a tall figure now stood with snow piled on his broad shoulders. It was Jonah Hale, a drifter who had arrived in town only days earlier, a man whose past was whispered about but never confirmed. Some said he'd been a lawman, others said he'd once hunted criminals across 3 states, but his eyes now were focused solely on the marshal. Sharp as a winter blade. "Let the woman go," Jonah said calmly, lowering his gun but keeping it ready. "Now." The marshal scoffed but loosened his grip slightly. Jonah stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching across the frost-bitten ground. "This town is tired," he said, his voice carrying to every doorway and window. "Tired of fear, tired of your games, tired of seeing good people punished while the ones with power walk away clean." The twins looked up at him, their faces streaked with tears and snow, clinging to their mother's arms. Alara met Jonah's eyes. There was something there, something steady and warm, like a fire struggling to burn in a storm. "You don't know what you're interfering with," Granger snapped. "This woman is a thief." "She's a mother," Jonah interrupted, stepping between them. "And you're a coward using your badge to break people who can't fight back." The townsfolk murmured nervously, shifting in the snow, glancing between Jonah and the marshal. Some looked ashamed for staying silent so long. Others looked hopeful for the first time in months. Granger's hand twitched near his holster, but Jonah's gun was already aimed again before he could blink. "Don't," Jonah warned quietly. "Not in front of her children." The wind howled around them, flinging shards of icy snow through the air, and slowly, very slowly, the marshal lifted his hand away from his weapon. Alara sagged with relief as Jonah gently placed himself as a barrier between her and the man who had tormented her family. The children clung to her, still sobbing, their words coming out in broken whispers. Jonah finally looked down at them, his expression softening. "You're safe now," he said. But the truth was they weren't, not yet. Because men like Marshal Granger never let go of power easily, and as he backed away, his mind already turning like a dark wheel. Plotting his next move, Jonah knew that the storm in Cold Creek was only beginning. But for this moment, just this moment, Ilara and her daughters breathed freely again in the falling snow, unaware that the truth about the mine explosion, her husband's death, and the Marshals' corruption would soon explode into a battle the entire town could no longer ignore, a battle that would change everything. After Jonah stepped in to save Ilara and her children, news of the confrontation spread through Cold Creek like wildfire, igniting whispers, suspicions, and long-buried truths that people had been too frightened to face. Ilara spent that night in the corner of the stable where she had been sheltering with the twins, but with the first light of dawn creeping over the frost-tipped roofs, Jonah appeared at the door with a quiet knock. The girls ran to him first, their faces lighting up with a trust that surprised even Ilara, who had learned the hard way never to rely on anyone. Jonah crouched down, brushing snow from their small shoulders. "I'm not here to scare you," he said softly. "I'm here to keep you safe. All of you." Ilara stepped closer, the exhaustion in her eyes mixing with gratitude. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. Jonah hesitated before answering. "Because I've seen men like Granger ruin towns just like this one. And I've seen good families destroyed because no one stood up when it mattered." He paused, his voice steady. "This time I'm not walking away." But Granger was far from defeated. Humiliated in front of the entire town, he spent the night drinking at the sheriff's office, fueled by rage and the burning need to re-establish dominance. As morning broke, he stormed into the dusty office of the mine owner, Victor Renshaw, a man even more feared than the marshal. Renshaw was the puppeteer behind many tragedies in Cold Creek, including the accident that killed Ilara's husband. And the marshal's brutality was one of his favorite tools. "Your incompetence is becoming a liability," Renshaw growled as Granger paced in front of him. "A drifter humiliates you in the street and now the town smells rebellion. Fix it." The marshal gritted his teeth. "I will. I'll handle the woman and the drifter both." Meanwhile, Jonah gathered a few townspeople who were tired of living under Granger's shadow. Mr. Cargill the barber, Clara the baker, the old church caretaker, and even a few mine workers who had known Ilara's husband. They met quietly in the back of the saloon as snowflakes melted against the window panes. Jonah laid everything out plainly. Granger's corruption, Renshaw's deadly schemes, the extortion of widows, the suspicious explosion that killed Ilara's husband Daniel. "If we want to make this town safe again," Jonah said, "we need proof and we need to stand together." Ilara, sitting beside him with the twins bundled in borrowed blankets, felt her heart ache hearing Daniel's name spoken with respect. Jonah proposed they search the abandoned records in the old mine office, a place left untouched since the explosion. Rumors said Daniel had hidden something there, a ledger or a letter exposing Renshaw's crimes. If they could find it, they could bring down both Renshaw and the marshal. As the group prepared to leave, Ilara pulled Jonah aside. "If there really is something Daniel left behind," she whispered, "why did he hide it instead of coming straight to the law?" Jonah held her gaze. "Because the law in this town doesn't protect people like you. It protects men like Renshaw." That truth stung, but she knew he was right. Together they made the treacherous journey toward the old mine, trudging through snow that reached their ankles. The twins stayed behind with Clara, who promised to keep them safe. The entrance to the mine office was barely visible under layers of ice and drifted snow, but Jonah forced it open with his shoulder. Inside, dust coated every surface, and the bitter cold seemed to whisper with the ghosts of those who had been lost. They searched through rusted filing cabinets, broken crates, and scattered documents until Ilara found a metal box hidden under a floorboard Daniel had once repaired. Hands trembling, she opened it to find a small leather journal filled with her husband's handwriting. The entries detailed unsafe conditions in the mine, illegal shortcuts ordered by Renshaw, and a warning that he feared he was being watched. The final page stopped Ilara's breath, a note addressed to her. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Use this to protect our girls." Tears filled her eyes, falling onto the worn pages as she clutched the journal to her chest. But before Jonah could offer a word of comfort, the sound of boots crunching outside made everyone freeze. Granger had followed them. Touching, he sneered as he stepped inside, gun drawn. But this little rebellion ends now. Jonah moved protectively in front of Alara as the townspeople behind him tensed. The marshal aimed his gun directly at Jonah, but before he could fire, one of the mine workers, a large man named Barrett, tackled him from behind, sending the gun skidding across the icy floor. Jonah seized the moment, pinning Granger down while Alara held the journal tightly against her chest. When the dust settled, the marshal lay unconscious and Jonah took his badge. "This belongs to the people now," he said. They dragged Granger to town, and when the people saw him bound and disgraced, their fear melted like snow under sunlight. Renshaw came storming out of his mansion when he heard shouting, but when Alara stepped forward holding Daniel's journal high for all to see, the crowd erupted with anger, surrounding the corrupt mine owner. The truth spread through the town in minutes, truth that had been buried for far too long. Renshaw was arrested by Jonah and the townspeople he once controlled, and for the first time in years, Cold Creek breathed freely. Later that evening, as lanterns glowed warmly through the snowfall, Alara stood with her daughters beside Jonah. "You saved us," she whispered. "No," Jonah replied. "You saved yourselves. The town just needed someone brave enough to cry out first. And your girls did exactly that." The twins, holding their mother's hands, looked up at Jonah with innocent pride. The storm was ending, the darkness lifting, and Cold Creek was finally ready to become a place of hope rather than fear. And as the camera of your story fades out on this moment of unity and rebirth, let the audience feel the courage that changed everything.